Hi there, Laurie Williams here, and I'm going to be demonstrating creating a textured landscape, which is this image that you see here, where I have used alcohol ink. I've used some big markers and a few other tools. We're going to create textures with the inks by pouring the ink, and then we're going to identify different areas in the landscape where it changes, and we're going to add texture to each of the individual areas to add interest. So let's jump right in. In this demonstration, I'm going to be using a combination of some Reese alcohol inks, and I have at my disposal here, I have ocean green, Kelly green, cobalt green, and sky, all from Reese. I love their vivid colors. Also like Ranger inks, and because I don't have a yellow in the Reese ink because I've used it all and haven't had a chance to replace it, I'm going to be using one of my most favorite colors in yellow is Sunshine Yellow with Ranger, and then my absolute favorite blue anywhere, hands down, is Ranger Sailboat Blue. Now to get started, I am working on the back of a piece of Kirkland photo paper, and what I do for these small projects is I cut the paper into 4 pieces. So they end up being 5.5 by 4.25, and they're perfect for creating little fun paintings that I can do in, in a course of an hour or half an hour. So let's get started. I always have myself a container of alcohol, and this is 91% isopropyl alcohol, and in a little container next to it. I have a small brush, and I have some other tools here that I'll show you throughout the demonstration as I start to create texture. But the first thing we're going to do is just work with dropping the ink. We're going to drop the ink and move it around a little bit with a brush. This just happens to be a stiff nylon brush, a number 4 flat, and I just pulled it out of the drawer. Any brush for this will do. And when I am creating my landscapes, what I like to do is think about what I want the sky to be like and what I want the foreground to be like, color-wise. And I think about what's going to happen when I mix the inks together. Am I going to create mud? Am I going to have like a muddy landscape? I mean, that might be what you're looking for. But if not, you may want just a colorful one like what I've done here. And so the colors, the yellows, the blues, and the greens that I pulled out today will allow me to create just that. You can use any color inks that you have at your disposal. Have fun with it. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to drop the ink on one side of the page, and we're going to tilt it and let the ink flow. And I like to do this in a lot of the products. So I'm going to line them up and go ahead and take the tops off of each of my bottles and line them up so that I have them ready to go when I'm ready for it. So I'm going to put my blues all at one end. Let's see, that's my yellow cap. Put my blues all down here on this end and the greens in the middle so that I'm ready to go. I may or may not use all these. I just like to have them lined up and ready to go, because when you're pouring the ink and you're letting it flow and you need to move it, you kind of have to act quickly. And if you're having to stop and put the lids back on your inks, it kind of hinders the effect a bit. So I have them all lined up. I've got their little caps behind them, and I'm ready to go. So I'm going to start with, and I don't do anything at all to prep the paper. I'm just going to start dropping the ink, and I'm going to start with my sailboat blue at the very top, and I'm just going to put a pretty generous amount there. Then I'm going to come in with the sky blue, and you can see the difference there. Did you notice the difference between the Ranger ink? It's a little thicker, and then the Reese ink just flowed right on down to the end. And I'm not worried about the pooling that I'm getting at the bottom yet. I'm just not going to concern myself with that. I'm going to do a large area with my yellow. And I'm always buying Sunshine Yellow because I end up using a lot of it. Let's see. Let's use some of this Kelly green down here, and a little bit of the cobalt green. Okay. And those Reese inks really flow fast. a lot faster than the Ranger. So if that's the kind of the thing you're going for, they're also a sort of a paler color, except for that cobalt green. That's kind of neat. That's what's at the bottom here. And so this is my first pass with it. And we're going to do some things to create texture. But the first thing I want to do on the first pass is get some ink down. I need a little bit more sailboat up here. And I can sort of start to drag it down a little bit. And then I could take my brush, and you see how this ink over here is just kind of coming up into that area. I'm just going to take that with my brush. The brush soaks up the ink and just kind of tap it off on my paper towels. Now I'm going to dip it into my alcohol to clean my brush a little bit, wipe it off on my paper towel. And then I'm just going to take the brush and let it, while this is still wet, allow it to cover up any ink spots that might be left. And I don't want to cross-contaminate too much, so I'm cleaning my brush before I go back down here. And a lot of times with the alcohol ink, I don't know if you can see this on the camera, but there's a little bit of like deposits in there. And that sometimes, I don't know if it's ink that dries up or it's fuzz that gets on it in the air. But I haven't put anything on here. It could be maybe there was something on the substrate before I started. I'm not going to worry about it. I never do. And it always ends up fine. I'm just going to go back now and do another pass. So I'm going to actually turn my paper around. And this time I'm going to start on this end with the blue. And that's the sky blue. And I'm going to come back again with the Ranger. And you can see how the Ranger kind of sticks a little bit better to the paper. And this time I'm not going to do the whole thing. I'm just going to kind of take my brush while this is wet and work with it to create some texture towards the top. And it's the sky, so, you know, I want some of the areas not to be as bright because it is going to be my sky. Let's come back with some more yellow. Clean off my brush. Always dry it off on the paper towel. I'll always have a paper towel next to me that I can use to clean my brush. So now what you can start to see here is there's a little bit of mud forming going on. That's okay, because in the landscape, in the distance, I want it to have some of that. And I'm just taking my brush here. Now notice a lot of times when I'm working with ink, I will use alcohol to dilute it, but for this project, I don't really want to use alcohol to dilute it because I want the colors to be strong, because to create the texture we want in the landscapes, we're going to be doing a lot of lifting, and you can't lift if you don't have ink there to lift. So very important there. So I'm going to put another drop here of this cobalt. I'm just going to drag it down a little bit. And you can start to see my landscape starting to form. And I can mix this in a little bit, you know, just get a little bit artistic with it. The other thing that you can do is a lot of times I'll use a stir stick, and I can use that to form ridges and stuff. So you can see how that's, but you have to do it while it's wet. And it creates kind of a really neat texture of its own. And if you do that right, you may not even have to add texture once you're done. I can soak up some of this. When you get edges, pulled edges, one of the tricks that you can do is take a brush, either a dry brush or one with just a little bit of alcohol on it. Make sure to dry it off on paper towel so you don't activate anything. But you just go around the edges and it just soaks it right. And I don't mean like paint around the edges. I mean just kind of tap it around the edges, and the ink soaks right into the brush. And then you can just come over to your towel and wipe that off. All right, guys, this is going to be our landscape that we're working with for this project. Now, moving to the next phase, what I start to do is visually look at where I call them when I'm doing a landscape like this, hills, where the hills and where the tops of the hills are and the behind the hills. And then I can start adding some texture to bring that out and add interest. And I have several techniques that I use for creating interest. And actually, there's probably 1,000 ways we do this. But today I'm just going to show you a few that you can use. Feel free to experiment with your own textures and use tools and things around the house that you find to create texture. And I always love doing this. And so what I'm going to be using to start with today is a piece of felt. And sometimes I put this piece of felt onto a block and tap it. But in these areas, and then because I'm working on a really small piece of art, I am going to use it in my hand and fold it so that I have control. So I can control this little tip here as I'm adding texture. So you can add texture either by dropping ink onto the item and adding ink to your picture, or lifting. And so I'm going to show you both of those techniques. So right now I am going to take my felt and I'm actually cutting it in two pieces. So the first one I'm going to do is actually subtract. And I'm taking my piece of felt and I fold it very tiny, just like this. And then I'm going to dip it in to this alcohol. And it doesn't matter that it's a little dirty. And so that wet my piece of felt here. And then I take it over to my paper towel and I just let it soak up the excess ink on there so that it's a damp sort of piece of felt. And then I'm ready to come in and start adding some texture. And so I'm going to start towards the top and come to the bottom. This first area here, I'm just going to tap, 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 tap. And I just tap 1,000,000 times. And this little piece of felt has alcohol on it. And so it will start adding texture. And so that's what I'm doing here, adding this really fun texture. And sometimes I let it dry a little bit and I'll come back and I'll add more. And because this looks like a hill coming up here and you just kind of have to use your intuitive creativity to do this, but it looks like it continues back here. So I'm going to actually carry this over into this area. And I stop it right where that, the yellow meets the blue there. So the next area I'm going to divide is this kind of a bigger area here. I'm actually going to just do it. This is a fun one, guys. What I'm going to use for this is I took a comb, like a plastic comb that I got at the dollar store, and I broke it. Because it was an inexpensive comb, it just snaps right in two. And this allows me to create a little plastic kind of brush. You would think that maybe you could use it to like comb and give a texture to, but it doesn't work that way. The ink or the alcohol, whatever you're using, ends up coming off too quickly, and I learned that from experience. But it does create a really cool dotting technique, and that's what I'm going to use in this big area here. So I'm still showing you lifting. So far we haven't added ink, we're still lifting. And what I do is I take it and I dip this into my little container of alcohol, and I take it over to my paper towel and I kind of dry it off a little bit. Just tap it around so that there's no like bubbles of alcohol in there. And then I take it over here and I just start touching it down, and it creates this really cool little line of dots. And sometimes if you still have a lot of alcohol on it, you will see that it'll make actual bubbles, but it's a different texture than what's in the back. And that's what makes it interesting, is having all the different textures. Now you can use this same technique creating, it doesn't have to be a landscape, it could be a seascape or a cityscape. I like creating all three of those with the alcohol inks, and you just keep going until you're satisfied with how much definition you have in there. Now on the next area, I want to add some ink. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually take a weld palette, and I'm going to pour a little bit, and this is just a flat palette that I have that I use. And one of the opportunities that we have when we're adding ink is we can add more color. So I started to pick up this cobalt blue, but then I said, look at here in my palette. Look at that beautiful, like, bright pink and purple. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of this alcohol, and I'm going to drop it right here into the palette. And take my little comb here and tap it on there. And now I can come in with another layer. And even if it doesn't exist, I can actually even create a section. And look how cool it is when I add it. Now I'm adding purple on top of yellow, which sometimes creates mud. But it's actually turning out pretty cool. So I'm just going to stick with it here. Let's take a tiny brush with a tiny tip. I think I have one right here. So here is a brush, and I will put the links to these. It's E-Boot. It's a 5/0 brush. Very tiny, fine detail brush. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it over into this area. In the palette, I poured a little bit of alcohol on top of this ink to reactivate it, but it's still very inky, and if I dip the brush into it and nipped it on here, it's going to spread out and cause a big issue on here. So what I'm doing is I'm waiting for a little bit of the alcohol to evaporate out, and if you look right around the edges here, you can see where it has pulled up a little bit. And then I can take it over here and see how if I tap it over here on the paper towel first, it will do it spreading out there until I get to a point where I can just come in and tap it ever so slightly here. And so I'm just going to do some dots in this area. And I'm blended into that purple. It looks kind of nice. So here I go back into my palette, back over to my paper towel. When I'm okay with the consistency, I come back over and start doing some more dots. So this is adding in ink instead of taking it away, which is great because you can come in and add some vivid color into sort of an already colorful background, but you can make it even more interesting. So remember I said we could find things around the house that that work really cool for texture. Well, I found this little piece of plastic, and it's got these really cool ridges in there, and I don't know if you can see them in the camera. I'll try to turn them and see them. They're like almost like a basket weave sort of. And I thought, well, that could be pretty interesting. So what I'm going to do is actually take some of this pink that I have over in the palette. I'm just going to kind of tap it into there, and then I'm going to cover the whole thing. Tap it in there. I'm going to bring it out here. I'm going to let the ink dry on it. I could just go ahead and spread the ink to help it dry. That's kind of cool. But I cannot, while it's wet, put it directly on there because it's going to be, that would be a no-no. So what I could do is, let's see if I have another piece of the paper here. Just take it and test it. Oh, and it's too dry now. So you have to find a balance there. So I'm going to wet it a little bit. Now, I kind of, yeah, that's neat. That's a really neat texture. So let me see if I can add that a little bit over here. Yeah, that's pretty cool. So I come over here and tap it into there, tap it over here, and tap it here. It doesn't add a whole lot, but and just enough to make it. What keeps the eye moving is all the different patterns, and it makes it just interesting enough. The next thing that I'm going to show you is still adding ink, but this time I'm going to pull out my markers. If you use most alcohol ink markers, they have like a wide nib and a narrow nib, but the nib on them are not always tiny, and then when you go to like do some of this fine detail work with it, it can be an issue. I have found these Bic markers. You can get them on Amazon. I'll put a link to the set or a set similar to this one. These are ultra fine tips, and you can see that you get a lot of different colors, and these are alcohol ink based, which is very cool. The other option you can use these are my Posca pens. And I have a whole set of those. So like here's an orange. Let me see what I can pull out here. So I'm just going to set my Posca markers aside for a moment, and I'm going to just work with the big markers. All right, so I'm going to go with the bright orange here. And now you can do all sorts of things with these. And this, you can see the tip on this is super fine, and it won't run when you can actually almost write on the surface in the alcohol without reactivating, which is kind of cool. So if you don't have a set of these, there's always a good thing to have in your arsenal. So I'm just going to kind of define an area here, and I just go in and I can add like cross hatching here, and that's what I'm doing. Just going to add some diagonal lines in here in this color. And I'm trying to be careful not to have too much of a pattern and keep it random, so that's interesting and more natural. This little line here goes over like this, and then up here like this. So I'm going to actually carry this same sort of design over here. So there we go. And I'm just going to keep adding things. I could take a darker green on top of some of the lighter green and give it some sort of design. So like this would go like into this one like this. And all I'm doing with this pen, and it kind of just for my own benefit, is making it just kind of like defining the area. And then I can come in and figure out what I want to put in there. So I could just put a zillion like little circles. And because it's alcohol, it ends up looking kind of cool because it runs together. It's not like really a circle because it's so tiny, the ink in the pen is running together, but it ends up making a really cool looking texture here that's different from any of the other textures that I have. You can also doodle. Obviously, doodling is always fun and one of my favorite things to do. I love to doodle. All right, let's switch over just so I can show you the difference. Let's show you the Posca pens. These are not alcohol based, and they work really awesome on top of alcohol ink. And I'm just going to use it to sort of define this area over here. And you have to pump these a little bit to get the paint flowing. Shake them, pump them. There we go. The one that these come in all sorts of different nibs. This nib is a fine point nib. These are cool to do. They actually allow you to do like more doodle type stuff, which is fun. And I'm just gonna do that here. Posca pens are really great to have. They're a little bit more expensive, but not that much, and it's worth the extra to use them. For white, if you don't have the Posca pens, you can also use the Uniball Signo white pen, which is like a gel pen, and it works great. You also may have gel pens. Gel pens also work and can be really cool. So I'm going to leave this because I want to now put in a tree. You can put in it, like I said, if you're working with seascapes, you can use a seascape. Or you can use, whatever you want. Obviously, there's not a tree in the sea. I mean, well, there may be, but not in the sea that I create. So when I go to draw a tree, because my light source is over here, I can make just a silhouette tree, and it doesn't really have to be any other color. Or I could come in and actually paint or draw in. And what I'm using here is a precision pen. This is an American Crafts version. It's fine tip. And it's great for writing. I just give a little scribble here on my paper towel to make sure I'm going. And then I just start with my base of my tree. And I just go up. I don't have to be too careful with it. And just create a base like that. And I just start filling it in. You can fill it in with, whatever you want. If you wanted to doodle the tree, you could doodle the tree as well. But just for this video and for your inspiration, I'm just going to just draw it in. And I just start out creating myself some branches. They start wide and then they go and get narrower as they go up, and none of the branches are ever straight. So I come down a little lower here, and I'll create another branch coming off over here. And, you know, if you don't have all the supplies that I'm using in this presentation, it's okay. Use what you have. Get creative. Like I said, for those textures and stuff, you can use basically anything you find around the house. And I'm always, every time I go to throw something away in the kitchen, I'm like, can I use that in the heart? It's actually almost ridiculous now. But I do. That's what I do. And then the final thing that I always do is I go back to my felt, my piece of felt, and I go to add some leaves. And I'm just going to use the green, the Kelly green from Reese for this. And I'll show you what I do. So I never pour over my piece because I've learned that the hard way that you don't do that. I folded my piece of felt into my hand. And you really should be wearing gloves. I know I'm not wearing them for this demonstration because I'm having to move a lot of things around. I'll just start tapping. And isn't it awesome how when you just start tapping, the ink does the work for you? That's what's so grand about alcohol inks. The more you tap, too, the more leaves you get. And you kind of want to turn things around because you want everything going in the same direction either. Now, I challenge you to go and create your own landscape or seascape or cityscape and use textures for interest. They're really fun with the vibrant colors of alcohol inks, and you can create some really fun and whimsical art. Hope you enjoyed this demonstration, and thanks for watching. I'm Laurie Williams with the Alcohol Ink Art Community and the Alcohol Ink Art Society. If you're not a member, join today.
Come learn, create, and share with us. It's a life-changing opportunity.